What's going on, guys? Bexio back, and today we got a brand new video on Bitcoin and how it can reach $1 million per coin, which is a massive target and something that people probably look at and don't even believe is actually even possible. But it is, and it's pretty possible with conservative estimates for a lot of things flowing into Bitcoin. So we all know people like Cathie Woods, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, the Winklevoss twins, all of these guys, they believe that Bitcoin will be a $1 million coin, that it'll be successful. People like Cathie Woods have put out their own arguments on why Bitcoin will be a $1 million coin, why it's going to be successful, how it's going to get there. And they break down all of the numbers. But one big thing to Bitcoin being successful and getting to larger price targets is scarcity. We all know Bitcoin is hard coded for 21 million Bitcoin. That is it to ever be in existence. But right now, we're currently at just over 19 million. We're about 90% of all of the supply has already been mined. And to get the next 10%, right now, it's taken us, 13 years ish to get to 90% of the supply being out. And for the next 10% to get mined and distributed, it will take 118 years or till the year 2140, which is crazy. Just amazingly long amounts of time. When you look at the first 90%, didn't take that long, 13 years to get there, but the remaining 10, it's going to be very, very long. So that is one reason why I think the 4-year cycle is going to go away, going to die, and we're going to turn into something else. As early Bitcoin was a 4-year cycle based around the halvings, I don't know if we're going to see that anymore. But right here, we have basic supply and demand, the supply only getting harder and harder to get. If you break down the numbers for every millionaire on the planet, they would only be able to own something like a third of a Bitcoin, which might even be too generous because we already know about 20% of Bitcoin supply, or about 4 million coins, are lost forever. They're gone, unknown where they are, into the universe. And that leaves us with a total supply of Bitcoin of around 17 million coins. So the real supply is extremely lower than even the supply that is 21 million. And once you go to 17 million, there's just so little amount of Bitcoin for if people start to get interested, if it gets adopted as a global currency, something that the world gets involved in. Now, your millionaires can only afford about a third of a Bitcoin at full 21 million rating. Now imagine the entire world of 7 or 8 billion people. There's drastic low amounts of Bitcoin that's available, or what each person's amount of Bitcoin you could get it would be. So it's a hard asset, very hard to get, and more adoption, more demand means the price has to move up for it. Right now, Bitcoin is worth about 750 billion, a little bit more than 750 billion dollars, at around $40,000 a coin. To put that in perspective, something like $1 million, $1 billion looks like this. You can see that, not ridiculous. Once you get to the billion, it's like, okay, that's a lot. But once you look at a trillion, now that is a massive difference, where you can see that and look at it and see that it is massively insane amounts of money. And if you look at what would be needed to get Bitcoin to $1 million per coin, which is about $20 trillion. This is what that looks like. Massive, massive amounts of money, almost unfathomable. But for Bitcoin to get to that $1 million mark, you don't actually need $20 trillion flowing in the system. That's not really how market caps work. Market cap is basically just the price, or the last known price of the asset someone bought it for, times the supply, gives you the market cap. So for Bitcoin, it's roughly around that $40,000, $41,000. And once you have the buy of that, times the total supply out right now, like 19 million or something, then that gives you the supply. So you can see this happening in Bitcoin with Tesla's accusation of Bitcoin, where they got $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin price during the tweet with Elon Musk and Michael Saylor, when they were talking to each other on Twitter, was around $23,000. And then the price, when Tesla announced it had bought $1.5 billion worth, it was at $48,000. So basically, the price of Bitcoin doubled. Now, in that time span, we don't really expect that Bitcoin added $400 billion worth of money flowed into Bitcoin. That didn't happen. Something more, probably like 10 to 20% of true value of true money flowed into the space and moved the price up $400 billion. So when we just extrapolate that out to the bigger numbers, to $20 trillion to get to $1 million Bitcoin, then we can see we actually probably only need something like 2 trillion to 3 or 4 trillion dollars to actually achieve the $20 trillion market cap and $1 million Bitcoin. And someone at ARC actually breaks this down really, really well. We can see gets to $1 million per coin by 2030, breaking it down by category and everything. And you can see right now, 2021. So when Bitcoin was $1 trillion market cap, $1.1 trillion to the $28.5 trillion market cap to get $1 million Bitcoin. This is how they break all of that down. So the first smart part up here is the remittance network. So money transferred around the globe, moving from, people do it a lot in the US, or if you move from a different country to the US, usually you send money back to your friends or family in remittance payments. And that's how money moves across the globe. And Bitcoin is obviously a very good asset for this, as it is global. It is not locked down into one country. It is global. So it is so just getting 50% of that global remittances market would give you 0.3 trillion or $300 billion added to the market cap, which would be about $14,000 per Bitcoin added to Bitcoin's price. And in the next section, we have emerging market currency. So excluding top four countries, just getting 10% of M2, which is a money supply of the entire world. Emerging markets here would add $2.8 trillion or $133,000 per Bitcoin to the price of Bitcoin. And you can have economic settlement network, which is just getting 25% of US bank settlement volumes. So we already know settling with Bitcoin, much easier, much faster, much more efficient than settling on the traditional finances and finance networks, banking networks, all those kinds of things. So already a massively good fit for it, very easy to implement. Even if it's only 25%, that adds $3.8 trillion worth of value, or $181,000 per Bitcoin. Next, nation state treasuries, 1%. So just getting 1% of these nation state treasuries would add $3.8 trillion or $181,000 per Bitcoin. And that's just 1%. So all of these numbers here are pretty conservative, are numbers that aren't, blasting open the doors and saying Bitcoin takes over the world, runs everything, does everything on its own. It's kind of like Bitcoin comes in the door, starts to operate, people start trying to use Bitcoin for these things and kind of adopt Bitcoin this way. It's not even having to take over the entire space, the entire world to do this, which is, I think, very, very conservative. So when you look at seizure resistant asset, 5% of global HNWI wealth, that would be $4 trillion or $190,000 per Bitcoin added to the Bitcoin price. Institutional investment, we've already seen this massively increase in just the 1 year, 2 years that, people like Michael Saylor started coming out. We have a bunch of companies now that have Bitcoin on their balance sheet, big names like we have MicroStrategy's, Tesla, Square. And once we start getting the bigger names, we can start seeing Apple, Microsoft, these giant corporations. Once they start getting in, that's big money flowing into the space. And even if you just have 2.5% of institutional asset base, you would get $4.1 trillion or $196,000 per Bitcoin. Next up, the corporate treasury. So 5% of cash of the S&P 500 companies flowed into Bitcoin. So obviously the corporate treasury, things like what MicroStrategies does. They have like their treasury reserve asset and their balance sheet that they've kind of adopted Bitcoin for. And this just getting 5% of their cash, not all their cash, not half their cash, just 10% of it, of only the S&P 500 companies, brings in $4.2 trillion or $200,000 per Bitcoin. and you also have digital gold, which has been something people have said time and time again for years and years about Bitcoin being digital gold, becoming digital gold. And you can see just 50% of gold's market cap, which is a large chunk. But when you look at gold, you look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is the better option for the monetary services of what gold tries to provide, and Bitcoin just provides it a lot better. So 50% would be a lot, but that would add $5.5 trillion or another $260,000 per Bitcoin for a grand total of $28.5 trillion market cap of Bitcoin, or $1.36 million Bitcoin. So a little bit closer to $1.5 million Bitcoin. But you can see all of these prices here are pretty conservative. Nothing's out there. Nothing's saying Bitcoin takes over the world, becomes a global reserve asset, replaces the dollar, and all goods are traded in Bitcoin. It's just kind of like a little bit here, a little bit there, and a bunch of money flows into Bitcoin and just makes the price well over $1 million. So it wouldn't be that difficult for Bitcoin to get to $1 million. It would probably take a little bit more time. So 2030 are the estimates for Bitcoin to get to $1 million. We know inflation and everything as well. So what would $1 million really be worth in 2030? Who really knows? But the price of Bitcoin, the availability to get Bitcoin is only getting harder. The supply is basically already out in the market. There's not going to be a lot of supply added to the market. And we're basically at the time where Bitcoin is just going to get harder and harder and harder to achieve, to get, to own if you want it. That's going to do it for this video, guys. As always, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I'll see you guys in my next video.